Our first story begins in Memphis, where debt collection supervisor Archibald managed recovery operations for Titan Collections Agency, overseeing a team of collectors who pursued delinquent accounts from various creditors. He had worked in debt collection for 14 years and built a reputation for achieving high recovery rates through aggressive but supposedly legal collection methods. When single mother Cordelia fell behind on credit card payments after losing her job, Archibald's agency took over her account and initially seemed professional in their approach. The first representative explained my payment options clearly and seemed understanding about my unemployment situation. Cordelia recalled about the initial contact. They offered reasonable payment arrangements that I thought I could manage once I found work. However, Cordelia soon discovered that Archibald had been coaching his collectors to use illegal harassment tactics while falsifying documentation to make expired debts appear current and legally collectible. The agency would threaten arrest, wage garnishment, and property seizure without legal authority, deliberately targeting vulnerable debtors who didn't understand their rights. Investigation revealed that Archibald's team had been collecting on thousands of time-barred debts by resetting statute of limitations dates and creating fraudulent court documents to intimidate consumers into paying debts they no longer legally owed. Over 5 years, the agency had illegally collected over $3 million from consumers through harassment and documentation fraud, while Archibald received substantial bonuses for exceeding collection targets through these unlawful methods. Our second story takes us to Tampa, where debt collector Evangeline specialized in medical debt recovery for healthcare financial services, pursuing hospital bills and medical expenses from patients who couldn't afford their healthcare costs. She had worked in medical collections for 8 years and claimed to understand the sensitive nature of healthcare debt situations. When elderly patient Horatio received collection calls about his wife's cancer treatment bills, Evangeline initially seemed sympathetic to their financial struggles and medical circumstances. She acknowledged that medical emergencies create unexpected financial burdens and said she wanted to work with us on a reasonable payment plan. Horatio remembered about their first conversation. Her understanding approach gave me hope that we could resolve the debt without destroying our retirement savings. But Horatio learned that Evangeline had been deliberately misrepresenting medical debt amounts while adding unauthorized fees and interest charges that weren't part of the original hospital agreements. She would inflate medical bills by including fictitious administrative costs and collection fees, then threaten to place liens on patients' homes if they didn't pay the fraudulent amounts immediately. The scheme particularly targeted elderly patients and families dealing with serious illnesses who were too overwhelmed to scrutinize billing details. Investigation uncovered that Evangeline had been inflating medical debts by an average of 40% while collecting over $800,000 in fraudulent fees and charges from vulnerable patients over 4 years, causing many families to drain their savings or sell their homes to pay fabricated medical collection amounts. Our third story unfolds in Phoenix, where collection agency owner Lysander operated Desert Recovery Solutions, purchasing charged-off debts from banks and credit card companies at steep discounts, then pursuing consumers for the full original amounts. He had worked in debt purchasing for 12 years and claimed to follow all federal and state collection regulations. When college graduate Tabitha received aggressive collection calls about a credit card debt she thought was settled years earlier, Lysander's agency insisted she owed the full balance plus accumulated interest and fees. They had detailed account information that seemed legitimate and threatened legal action if I didn't pay immediately. Tabitha explained about the collection pressure. Their documentation looked official, and they claimed to have purchased my debt legally from the original creditor. However, Tabitha discovered that Lysander had been purchasing fraudulent debt portfolios containing accounts that had already been settled, discharged in bankruptcy, or paid in full, then pursuing consumers for money they didn't actually owe. The agency would create false documentation and fabricate account histories to make settled debts appear active and collectible. Investigation revealed that Lysander had been knowingly purchasing invalid debt portfolios for pennies on the dollar, then collecting over $2 million from consumers on debts that had been legally resolved or never existed, while maintaining fraudulent records to support their collection activities. Our fourth story brings us to Cleveland, where payday loan collector Montgomery worked for Quick Cash Recovery, pursuing short-term loan defaults and rollover fees from borrowers who couldn't repay high-interest payday advances. He had worked in payday collections for 6 years and was known for his aggressive pursuit of delinquent borrowers. When factory worker Octavia defaulted on a payday loan after unexpected medical expenses, Montgomery began calling her workplace and threatening criminal prosecution for writing bad checks. He claimed that defaulting on a payday loan was check fraud and that I could be arrested if I didn't pay immediately. Octavia recalled about the intimidation tactics. His threats about criminal charges terrified me because I couldn't afford legal problems on top of my financial struggles. But Octavia learned that Montgomery had been deliberately misrepresenting payday loan defaults as criminal matters while threatening prosecution that collection agencies have no authority to initiate. He would falsely claim that payday loan defaults constituted check fraud or theft, then demand immediate payment to avoid arrest and criminal charges. The scheme particularly targeted low-income borrowers who didn't understand that payday loan defaults are civil matters, not criminal offenses. Investigation showed that Montgomery had been making false criminal threats to over 1,500 payday loan borrowers while collecting approximately $600,000 through illegal intimidation tactics, causing many borrowers to pay loans they weren't legally required to repay or take additional high-interest loans to avoid fictitious criminal prosecution. Our fifth story takes place in Detroit, where student loan collector Prudence worked for Education Debt Solutions, pursuing defaulted federal and private student loans from graduates struggling with employment and loan payments. She had worked in student loan collections for 9 years and claimed expertise in loan rehabilitation and forgiveness programs. When recent graduate Quincy fell behind on his student loan payments due to unemployment, Prudence contacted him about resolving his default status and restoring his loan eligibility. She explained various options for getting my loans back in good standing and seemed knowledgeable about federal student loan programs. Quincy remembered about their initial discussions. Her expertise in student loan regulations gave me confidence that she could help me find a legitimate solution. However, Quincy discovered that Prudence had been deliberately providing false information about loan forgiveness programs while steering borrowers into expensive private consolidation loans that eliminated their federal protections and forgiveness eligibility. She would misrepresent income-driven repayment options and claim that private consolidation was the only way to avoid wage garnishment and tax refund seizure. Investigation revealed that Prudence had been collecting substantial commissions from private lenders by convincing over 800 federal loan borrowers to consolidate into private loans, costing them approximately $12 million in lost federal benefits and forgiveness opportunities while generating over $200,000 in referral fees for herself. Our sixth story occurs in Houston, where auto loan collector Reginald specialized in vehicle repossession and deficiency balance recovery for Premier Auto Collections, pursuing borrowers whose cars had been repossessed but still owed money on their loans. He had worked in auto collections for 11 years and was known for his knowledge of repossession laws and deficiency calculations. When Nurse Samantha's car was repossessed after she fell behind on payments during a family emergency, Reginald contacted her about the remaining balance after the vehicle was sold at auction. He explained that I still owed money because the auction price didn't cover my loan balance, and he seemed to understand the mathematics of deficiency calculations. Samantha recalled about their conversation. His knowledge of auto lending gave me confidence that his deficiency calculation was accurate. But Samantha learned that Reginald had been deliberately inflating deficiency balances while falsifying auction records to make it appear that repossessed vehicles sold for less than their actual market value. He would claim cars sold for minimal amounts at auction, then pursue borrowers for inflated deficiency balances based on fraudulent sale documentation. The scheme involved corrupt auction houses that provided false sale records showing below-market prices, while vehicles were actually sold for higher amounts or retained by the collection agency. Investigation uncovered that Reginald had been inflating auto deficiency balances by an average of 60% while collecting over $1 million in fraudulent deficiency payments from borrowers over 4 years, while the repossessed vehicles were actually sold for amounts that should have eliminated or substantially reduced the claimed deficiencies. Our seventh story unfolds in Seattle, where mortgage collection specialist Sterling worked for Home Loan Recovery Services, pursuing defaulted mortgage payments and foreclosure alternatives from homeowners facing financial difficulties. He had worked in mortgage collections for 10 years and claimed expertise in loan modification and foreclosure prevention programs. When homeowner Stephanie fell behind on her mortgage after her husband's job loss, Sterling contacted her about options for avoiding foreclosure and keeping her family home. He explained various loan modification programs and seemed knowledgeable about foreclosure alternatives. Stephanie explained about their initial discussions. His understanding of mortgage assistance programs gave me hope that we could save our home. However, Stephanie discovered that Sterling had been deliberately sabotaging loan modification applications while steering homeowners into expensive refinancing schemes that stripped their equity and increased their monthly payments. He would provide false information about government assistance programs and claim that private refinancing was the only way to avoid foreclosure. Investigation revealed that Sterling had been collecting substantial fees from predatory lenders by convincing over 300 distressed homeowners to refinance into high-cost loans, costing them approximately $15 million in lost equity and increased payments, while generating over $300,000 in referral fees for himself, ultimately leading many families to lose their homes despite having qualified for legitimate assistance programs. Our eighth story brings us to Atlanta, where credit card collector Vanessa worked for Apex Credit Recovery, pursuing charged-off credit card debts from consumers who had defaulted on their accounts. She had worked in credit card collections for 7 years and was known for her persistence in pursuing difficult accounts. When retail worker Tyler received collection calls about an old credit card debt, Vanessa claimed to have complete account documentation and threatened immediate legal action if he didn't arrange payment. She had detailed transaction records and claimed the debt was definitely valid and legally collectible. Tyler remembered about the collection pressure. Her documentation seemed legitimate, and she threatened to garnish my wages if I didn't pay immediately. But Tyler learned that Vanessa had been pursuing consumers for credit card debts that belonged to other people with similar names, deliberately ignoring identity verification requirements to collect money from wrong parties. She would use incomplete account information to match debts with consumers who had similar names or addresses, then refuse to provide proper debt validation when challenged. The scheme particularly targeted people with common names who might be confused for the actual debtors. Investigation showed that Vanessa had been collecting from wrong parties in over 40% of her cases, while generating approximately $500,000 in fraudulent collections from people who never owed the debts, causing significant credit damage and financial harm to consumers who were victims of mistaken identity collection attempts. Our ninth story takes place in Dallas, where collection attorney Wayne operated Wayne Legal Collections, filing lawsuits against consumers for unpaid debts while claiming to follow all legal procedures for debt collection litigation. He had practiced collection law for 13 years and built a reputation for successful debt collection judgments. When server Wilhelmina was sued for an old medical debt, Wayne's firm sent official-looking court documents demanding payment and threatening wage garnishment if she didn't respond. The lawsuit papers looked legitimate and included specific court information and case numbers. Wilhelmina recalled about receiving the legal documents. The professional appearance of the documents convinced me that this was a real lawsuit requiring immediate attention. However, Wilhelmina discovered that Wayne had been filing fraudulent lawsuits using fake court documents and fictitious case numbers to intimidate consumers into paying debts without actual legal proceedings. He would create official-looking legal papers and threaten court judgments that didn't exist, targeting consumers who couldn't afford attorneys to verify the legitimacy of the supposed lawsuits. Investigation revealed that Wayne had been sending fraudulent legal documents to over 2,000 consumers while collecting approximately $1 million through fake lawsuit intimidation, causing many people to pay debts they didn't owe or weren't legally required to pay while believing they were facing legitimate court judgments. Our 10th story occurs in Kansas City, where tax debt collector Zoe worked for Revenue Recovery Associates, pursuing unpaid tax obligations and IRS debts from taxpayers who owed money to federal and state tax agencies. She had worked in tax collections for 8 years and claimed expertise in tax resolution and payment arrangements. When small business owner Andrew received calls about substantial tax debts, Zoe offered to negotiate with the IRS on his behalf and secure favorable payment terms. She seemed very knowledgeable about tax law and IRS procedures, explaining various options for resolving tax debts. Andrew explained about their initial conversation. Her tax expertise gave me confidence that she could help me resolve my tax problems legitimately. But Andrew learned that Zoe had been deliberately providing false information about tax resolution programs while charging excessive fees for services that taxpayers could obtain directly from the IRS for free. She would exaggerate the complexity of tax resolution and claim that professional representation was mandatory for obtaining payment arrangements and penalty reductions. Investigation uncovered that Zoe had been charging over 300 taxpayers an average of $5,000 each for tax resolution services that were available for free, collecting approximately $1.5 million in unnecessary fees, while providing no additional value beyond what taxpayers could achieve through direct contact with tax agencies. Our 11th story unfolds in Portland, where business debt collector Dahlia specialized in commercial collections for enterprise debt solutions, pursuing unpaid invoices and contract obligations from businesses that owed money to suppliers and service providers. She had worked in business collections for 12 years and was known for her understanding of commercial law and business relationships. When restaurant owner Elena fell behind on payments to food suppliers during the pandemic, Dahlia began pursuing the outstanding invoices with increasingly aggressive tactics. She initially seemed understanding about the challenges restaurants faced during COVID-19 and offered reasonable payment arrangements. Elena recalled about the early collection efforts. Her business knowledge suggested she understood the difficulties of restaurant operations during the pandemic. However, Elena discovered that Dahlia had been inflating commercial debts while adding unauthorized collection fees and interest charges that weren't specified in the original business contracts. She would claim that collection agencies had the right to add substantial fees and interest to business debts, then threatened to file liens against business assets if the inflated amounts weren't paid immediately. Investigation revealed that Dahlia had been inflating business debts by an average of 50% while collecting over $1 million in fraudulent fees from struggling businesses over 3 years, forcing many companies to pay unauthorized charges to avoid disruption of their supplier relationships and business operations. Our 12th story brings us to Nashville, where judgment collector Francisco worked for Superior Judgment Recovery, pursuing court-ordered debt judgments and attempting to collect money from consumers who had lost debt collection lawsuits. He had worked in judgment collection for 9 years and claimed expertise in post-judgment collection procedures and asset recovery. When teacher Gabriella received calls about a judgment she didn't know existed, Francisco threatened immediate bank account seizure and wage garnishment if she didn't pay the full amount immediately. He claimed to have a court judgment against me and threatened to freeze my bank accounts and garnish my wages. Gabriella remembered about the intimidation tactics. His knowledge of legal collection procedures convinced me that he had legitimate authority to seize my assets. But Gabriella learned that Francisco had been pursuing consumers for judgments that had expired, been satisfied, or never existed, using fraudulent court documentation to support his collection efforts. He would create fake judgment records and claim legal authority he didn't possess to intimidate consumers into paying money they didn't owe. Investigation showed that Francisco had been collecting on invalid judgments while generating approximately $700,000 through fraudulent legal intimidation over 4 years, causing many consumers to pay debts that were no longer legally collectible or had never been reduced to valid court judgments. Our 13th story takes place in Phoenix, where tribal lending collector Harrison pursued payday and installment loan defaults for Native American lending operations that claimed sovereign immunity from state lending laws. He had worked in tribal lending collections for 6 years and was known for his aggressive pursuit of high-interest loan defaults. When construction worker Imogene defaulted on a tribal payday loan with extremely high interest rates, Harrison began calling her family members and employers while threatening legal action that he claimed state laws couldn't prevent. He said that tribal loans were protected by federal law and that I couldn't use state regulations to avoid paying the debt. Imogene explained about the collection pressure. His claims about tribal sovereignty convinced me that I had no legal protections against their collection activities. However, Imogene discovered that Harrison had been deliberately misrepresenting tribal lending laws while pursuing borrowers for loans that violated state usury laws and weren't legally enforceable. He would falsely claim that tribal sovereignty protected predatory lending practices and that borrowers had no legal recourse against abusive collection tactics. Investigation revealed that Harrison had been collecting on hundreds of illegal tribal loans while generating over $400,000 through false legal intimidation, targeting borrowers who didn't understand that many tribal lending arrangements are actually illegal under state law, and that consumers retain legal protections against predatory lending practices regardless of claimed tribal affiliation. Our 14th story occurs in Minneapolis, where collection agency supervisor Isabella managed recovery operations for Relentless Collections, overseeing collectors who pursued various types of consumer debts using advanced technology and data analytics. She had worked in debt collection for 15 years and claimed to use cutting-edge methods for locating debtors and maximizing recovery rates. When retiree Jasper received calls about multiple old debts he thought were resolved, Isabella's team used detailed personal information to pressure him into paying immediately. They knew extensive details about my financial situation and family members, which convinced me that their debt claims were legitimate. Jasper recalled about the collection pressure. Their access to personal information suggested they had official authority and accurate records. But Jasper learned that Isabella had been using illegally obtained personal data while pursuing consumers for debts that had been discharged in bankruptcy or settled years earlier. Her team would access credit reports without authorization and use personal information to intimidate consumers and their family members. Investigation uncovered that Isabella had been operating an extensive data mining operation while collecting over $1.5 million on invalid debts over 3 years, using illegally obtained personal information to pressure over 1,000 consumers into paying debts they no longer legally owed. Our 15th story unfolds in Las Vegas, where casino debt collector Jordan specialized in pursuing gambling debts and marker obligations from casino patrons who owed money to gaming establishments. He had worked in casino collections for 8 years and claimed expertise in gaming law and marker collection procedures. When regular casino patron Kenneth defaulted on his gambling markers during a losing streak, Jordan began pursuing the debt with threats of criminal prosecution for writing bad checks to the casino. He claimed that casino markers were the same as bad checks and that I could be arrested for theft if I didn't pay immediately. Kenneth remembered about the intimidation tactics. His knowledge of gaming law convinced me that I was facing serious criminal charges. However, Kenneth discovered that Jordan had been deliberately misrepresenting gaming debt collection laws while threatening criminal prosecution that collection agencies have no authority to initiate. He would falsely claim that unpaid casino markers constituted criminal theft and that immediate payment was necessary to avoid arrest and prosecution. Investigation revealed that Jordan had been making false criminal threats to over 300 casino debtors while collecting approximately $800,000 through illegal intimidation, causing many gambling debt borrowers to pay markers they weren't legally required to repay or weren't actually valid debts owed to the casinos. Our 16th story brings us to San Antonio, where collection agency owner Julia operated Lone Star Recovery Services, purchasing charged-off consumer debts and pursuing collection through automated calling systems and form letters. She had worked in debt purchasing for 11 years and claimed to operate within federal telemarketing and collection regulations. When factory worker Kenneth received hundreds of automated collection calls about an old debt, Julia's system left threatening voicemails demanding immediate payment and threatening legal action. The automated calls came multiple times per day and left messages threatening lawsuits and wage garnishment. Kenneth explained about the harassment. The volume and intensity of the calls made it impossible to ignore their collection efforts. But Kenneth learned that Julia had been operating an illegal robocalling operation while violating federal telephone and collection regulations that limit automated contact with consumers. Her system would call consumers dozens of times per day and leave threatening messages that violated collection law requirements. Investigation showed that Julia had been making over 50,000 illegal robocalls per month while collecting approximately $600,000 through automated harassment over 2 years, causing severe disruption to consumers' daily lives and violating federal regulations designed to protect people from abusive collection practices. Our 17th story takes place in Baltimore, where debt validation specialist Lauren worked for document verification services, responding to consumer requests for debt validation and proof of obligation when consumers challenged collection attempts. She had worked in debt validation for 7 years and was responsible for providing legal documentation proving the validity of collected debts. When office worker Marcus requested validation of a credit card debt he didn't recognize, Lauren provided what appeared to be comprehensive documentation, including original contracts and account statements. She sent detailed paperwork that seemed to prove the debt was mine, including account numbers and transaction records. Marcus recalled about the validation response. The documentation looked legitimate and convinced me that I must have forgotten about the old credit card account. However, Marcus discovered that Lauren had been creating fraudulent debt validation documents while providing fake contracts and fabricated account statements to support invalid collection attempts. She would generate false paperwork using consumer information obtained through credit reports and data brokers, creating convincing but completely fabricated debt documentation. Investigation revealed that Lauren had been providing fraudulent debt validation for over 2,000 collection attempts, while helping agencies collect approximately $3 million on debts that were never properly validated or didn't belong to the consumers being pursued. Our 18th story occurs in Denver, where collection attorney Millicent operated Mountain Legal Collections, filing lawsuits against consumers for unpaid debts while claiming to provide proper legal representation for creditors. She had practiced collection law for 12 years and built a reputation for successful debt collection litigation. When retail worker Montgomery was sued for an old medical debt, Millicent's firm filed official court documents and began legal proceedings that appeared legitimate and properly filed. The lawsuit was filed in real court with proper case numbers and legal documentation. Montgomery explained about the collection lawsuit. The professional legal proceedings convinced me that this was a valid debt collection case. But Montgomery learned that Millicent had been filing collection lawsuits without proper evidence, while using fraudulent documentation to support court cases against consumers who didn't actually owe the claimed debts. She would file lawsuits based on incomplete or fabricated debt records, then obtain default judgments when consumers couldn't afford legal representation to challenge the fraudulent claims. Investigation uncovered that Millicent had been filing collection lawsuits with insufficient evidence in over 60% of her cases, while obtaining approximately $2 million in fraudulent court judgments over 4 years, causing many consumers to pay debts they didn't owe or face wage garnishment and asset seizure based on invalid legal proceedings. Our 19th story unfolds in Tampa, where mortgage debt collector Natalie specialized in pursuing deficiency balances after foreclosure for home loan collections, contacting former homeowners who still owed money after their homes were foreclosed and sold. She had worked in mortgage collections for 10 years and claimed expertise in foreclosure law and deficiency calculations. When former homeowner Nicole received calls about money still owed after her home foreclosure, Natalie explained that the sale price didn't cover the mortgage balance and that she remained responsible for the difference. She seemed knowledgeable about foreclosure procedures and explained how deficiency balances are calculated after foreclosure sales. Nicole remembered about their conversation. Her expertise in mortgage law convinced me that I legitimately owed the remaining balance. However, Nicole discovered that Natalie had been pursuing consumers for mortgage deficiency balances that were prohibited by state law while falsifying foreclosure documentation to support invalid collection attempts. She would claim that consumers owed deficiency balances in states where such collections are legally prohibited, using fraudulent foreclosure records to support her claims. Investigation revealed that Natalie had been collecting prohibited deficiency balances while generating over $900,000 through illegal mortgage collection over 3 years, targeting former homeowners who didn't understand their state's foreclosure laws and legal protections against deficiency balance collection. Our 20th story brings us to Phoenix, where collection agency trainer Omar developed training programs for Aggressive Recovery Institute, teaching collection techniques and legal compliance to debt collectors throughout the industry. He had worked in collection training for 13 years and claimed expertise in federal and state collection regulations. When new collector Patricia attended his training seminars, Omar taught what appeared to be comprehensive collection techniques and legal compliance procedures. He seemed very knowledgeable about collection law and taught detailed procedures for contacting consumers and pursuing debts legally. Patricia recalled about the training program. His expertise in collection regulations gave me confidence that I was learning legitimate collection practices. But Patricia learned that Omar had been deliberately teaching illegal collection techniques while training collectors to use harassment and intimidation tactics that violated federal collection laws. He would instruct collectors to make false threats and use deceptive practices while claiming these techniques were legal and effective. Investigation showed that Omar had been training over 500 collectors in illegal collection practices while generating approximately $300,000 from training fees over 4 years, causing widespread violations of consumer protection laws as his trained collectors implemented the illegal techniques he taught throughout the debt collection industry. Our 21st story takes place in Seattle, where judgment enforcement specialist Prudence worked for Northwest Asset Recovery, attempting to collect court-ordered judgments through wage garnishment, bank account seizure, and property liens. She had worked in judgment enforcement for 9 years and claimed expertise in legal collection procedures and asset discovery. When librarian Quincy received notice of wage garnishment for a judgment he didn't remember, Prudence explained that court judgments allowed immediate asset seizure and that he had no legal options to avoid collection. She claimed that judgments provided absolute legal authority to seize wages and assets without further court proceedings. Quincy explained about the collection threat. Her knowledge of legal procedures convinced me that I had no choice but to pay immediately. However, Quincy discovered that Prudence had been pursuing judgment enforcement without proper legal authority while using fraudulent court documentation to support asset seizure attempts. She would claim to have judgments that didn't exist or had expired, then threaten immediate asset seizure based on invalid legal authority. Investigation revealed that Prudence had been conducting illegal judgment enforcement while collecting over $700,000 through fraudulent legal intimidation over 3 years, causing many consumers to pay debts they didn't owe or weren't legally required to pay while believing they were facing legitimate court-ordered collection. Our 22nd story occurs in Atlanta, where collection technology specialist Rachel developed automated collection systems for digital recovery solutions, creating software and algorithms for contacting consumers and managing debt collection operations. She had worked in collection technology for 8 years and claimed to design systems that complied with federal telemarketing and collection regulations. When customer service representative Reginald received constant automated calls about an old debt, Rachel's system left recorded messages demanding payment and threatening legal action. The automated system called multiple times per day and left threatening messages that seemed professionally recorded. Reginald remembered about the harassment. The sophisticated technology convinced me that this was a legitimate collection operation. But Reginald learned that Rachel had been designing collection systems that deliberately violated federal regulations while creating technology that harassed consumers through illegal automated contact methods. Her systems would make prohibited robocalls and leave threatening messages that violated collection law requirements. Investigation uncovered that Rachel had been developing illegal collection technology while generating over $400,000 in licensing fees from collection agencies over 2 years, enabling widespread violations of consumer protection laws as her systems automatically harassed thousands of consumers through prohibited automated collection methods. Our 23rd story unfolds in Houston, where collection data analyst Robert specialized in consumer profiling for strategic recovery analytics, developing detailed consumer profiles and financial assessments to help collection agencies target vulnerable debtors. He had worked in collection analytics for 10 years and claimed expertise in data analysis and consumer behavior prediction. When nurse Rosalind received collection calls that referenced extensive personal information about her family and finances, Robert's profiling had identified her as a priority target for aggressive collection efforts. They knew detailed information about my income, family members, and financial situation that convinced me they had legitimate authority. Rosalind recalled about the collection pressure. Their access to personal data suggested they had official records and accurate debt information. However, Rosalind discovered that Robert had been creating consumer profiles using illegally obtained personal data while helping collection agencies target vulnerable consumers with intimidation tactics. He would compile detailed personal information from credit reports, social media, and data brokers to identify consumers most likely to pay under pressure. Investigation revealed that Robert had been providing illegal consumer profiling services while generating approximately $200,000 from collection agencies over 3 years, enabling targeted harassment of over 10,000 consumers based on personal information that was illegally obtained and used to exploit their financial vulnerabilities. Our 24th story brings us to Las Vegas, where collection consulting firm owner Samantha operated Elite Recovery Consulting, providing strategic advice and operational guidance to debt collection agencies throughout the industry. She had worked in collection consulting for 14 years and claimed expertise in maximizing recovery rates while maintaining legal compliance. When collection agency manager Sebastian hired her consulting services, Samantha recommended what appeared to be innovative collection strategies and operational improvements. She seemed very knowledgeable about collection industry best practices and recommended techniques that she claimed would improve our recovery rates legally. Sebastian explained about the consulting relationship. Her industry expertise gave me confidence that her recommendations would help us collect more effectively. But Sebastian learned that Samantha had been deliberately recommending illegal collection practices while advising agencies to use harassment and deception tactics that violated federal collection laws. She would suggest techniques that maximize collection revenue while disregarding consumer protection requirements and legal compliance obligations. Investigation showed that Samantha had been providing illegal collection consulting while generating over $600,000 in consulting fees from collection agencies over 5 years, causing widespread violations of consumer protection laws as her client agencies implemented the illegal techniques she recommended throughout their collection operations. Our 25th story takes place in Phoenix, where collection software vendor Sterling developed debt collection management systems for Apex Collection Technology, creating software platforms that managed consumer contact and debt tracking for collection agencies. He had worked in collection software for 11 years and claimed to design systems that automated collection operations while maintaining legal compliance. When collection agency owner Stephanie purchased his software platform, Sterling provided what appeared to be comprehensive debt management and consumer contact systems. The software seemed sophisticated and included features for managing consumer contact and tracking collection activities. Stephanie recalled about the technology implementation. His expertise in collection technology convinced me that the system would help us operate more efficiently. However, Stephanie discovered that Sterling had been designing collection software that deliberately facilitated illegal collection practices while creating systems that automatically violated federal regulations governing consumer contact and debt collection procedures. His software would automatically make prohibited calls and generate threatening communications that violated collection law requirements. Investigation revealed that Sterling had been developing illegal collection software while generating approximately $800,000 in licensing revenue from collection agencies over 4 years, enabling automatic violations of consumer protection laws as his software systems harassed hundreds of thousands of consumers through prohibited automated collection activities. Our 26th story occurs in Dallas, where collection industry lobbyist Tabitha worked for Professional Recovery Association, representing debt collection interests and advocating for industry-friendly legislation and regulatory changes. She had worked in collection industry advocacy for 12 years and claimed to promote responsible collection practices while protecting legitimate industry interests. When state legislators considered consumer protection bills, Tabitha testified against regulations that she claimed would harm legitimate debt collection while protecting consumers from abuse. She seemed knowledgeable about collection industry operations and argued that excessive regulation would prevent legitimate debt recovery. One legislator recalled about her testimony. Her industry expertise convinced many lawmakers that proposed consumer protections were unnecessary and harmful. But investigation revealed that Tabitha had been deliberately misleading legislators while promoting industry positions that would eliminate consumer protections and enable abusive collection practices. She would provide false information about collection industry practices and misrepresent the impact of consumer protection laws. Investigation showed that Tabitha had been conducting fraudulent lobbying activities while collecting over $300,000 from collection industry clients over 3 years, successfully weakening consumer protection laws and enabling continued abusive collection practices throughout the industry. Our 27th story unfolds in Tampa, where collection agency auditor Tyler specialized in compliance monitoring for regulatory compliance services, conducting audits and assessments to ensure collection agencies followed federal and state collection regulations. He had worked in collection compliance for 9 years and was trusted to identify regulatory violations and recommend corrective actions. When collection agency manager Vanessa hired his auditing services, Tyler conducted what appeared to be comprehensive compliance reviews and regulatory assessments. He seemed very knowledgeable about collection regulations and conducted detailed reviews of our collection procedures and consumer contact methods. Vanessa explained about the compliance audit. His regulatory expertise gave me confidence that his audit would identify any compliance issues. However, Vanessa discovered that Tyler had been providing fraudulent compliance audits while certifying collection agencies as compliant despite ongoing violations of federal collection laws. He would overlook obvious regulatory violations and provide false compliance certifications in exchange for continued consulting fees. Investigation revealed that Tyler had been providing fraudulent compliance audits while collecting approximately $400,000 from collection agencies over 4 years, enabling continued violations of consumer protection laws by certifying non-compliant agencies as meeting regulatory requirements. Our 28th story brings us to Phoenix, where collection attorney Victor operated Desert Legal Collections, filing collection lawsuits and pursuing legal judgments against consumers while claiming to provide proper legal representation for creditors throughout the Southwest. He had practiced collection law for 15 years and built a reputation for aggressive but supposedly legal debt collection litigation. When Server Wayne was sued for multiple old debts, Victor's firm filed numerous lawsuits with official court documentation and legal proceedings that appeared comprehensive and properly filed. He filed multiple lawsuits with proper legal documentation and seemed to have extensive evidence supporting the debt claims. Wayne recalled about the collection litigation. The professional legal proceedings convinced me that these were valid debt collection cases. But Wayne learned that Victor had been operating a lawsuit mill while filing hundreds of collection lawsuits without proper evidence or legal basis, using fraudulent documentation and fabricated debt records to support mass litigation against consumers. He would file multiple lawsuits simultaneously without adequate legal research or evidence verification, obtaining default judgments when consumers couldn't afford legal representation. Investigation uncovered that Victor had been filing collection lawsuits with insufficient evidence in over 70% of his cases, while obtaining approximately $4 million in fraudulent court judgments over 5 years, causing thousands of consumers to pay debts they didn't owe or face wage garnishment and asset seizure based on invalid legal proceedings. Our 29th story takes place in Seattle, where collection agency administrator Wilhelmina managed operations for Pacific Recovery Services, overseeing consumer contact procedures and debt tracking systems for a large collection operation. She had worked in collection administration for 13 years and was responsible for ensuring proper documentation and consumer communication procedures. When Carpenter Zoe received collection calls about an old debt, Wilhelmina's agency provided detailed account information and documentation that appeared to support their collection efforts. They had extensive account records and transaction details that seemed to prove the debt was legitimate. Zoe explained about the collection documentation. Their detailed records convinced me that they had accurate information about the debt. However, Zoe discovered that Wilhelmina had been maintaining fraudulent debt records while creating false account documentation to support collection attempts on debts that were never properly purchased or validated. She would fabricate account histories and transaction records using consumer information obtained through data brokers and credit reports. Investigation revealed that Wilhelmina had been maintaining fraudulent debt records for over 5,000 collection accounts while enabling the collection of approximately $2 million on invalid debts over 4 years, causing widespread consumer harm through false documentation that supported collection efforts on debts that were never properly verified or legally owned by the collection agency. Our 30th story occurs in Las Vegas, where collection industry consultant Andrew operated Southwest Recovery Consulting, providing operational guidance and strategic advice to debt collection agencies throughout the region. He had worked in collection consulting for 16 years and claimed expertise in maximizing collection revenue while maintaining regulatory compliance and consumer relations. When collection agency owner Dahlia hired his consulting services to improve recovery rates, Andrew recommended what appeared to be innovative collection strategies and operational improvements. He seemed very experienced with collection industry operations and recommended techniques that he claimed would increase our recovery rates through better consumer psychology. Dahlia recalled about the consulting relationship. His industry expertise gave me confidence that his recommendations would help us collect more effectively. But Dahlia learned that Andrew had been deliberately recommending psychological manipulation tactics while advising agencies to exploit consumer vulnerabilities and use emotional pressure techniques that violated ethical collection standards. He would suggest methods for identifying financially vulnerable consumers and using their personal circumstances to force payment through psychological coercion. Investigation showed that Andrew had been providing unethical collection consulting while generating over $500,000 in consulting fees from collection agencies over 5 years, enabling psychological manipulation of thousands of vulnerable consumers through targeted emotional exploitation techniques designed to maximize collection revenue regardless of consumer welfare. Our 31st story unfolds in Miami, where collection agency owner Elena operated Sunshine State Collections, purchasing charged-off consumer debts from banks and credit card companies, then pursuing aggressive collection through multiple contact methods and legal threats. She had worked in debt purchasing for 12 years and claimed to operate a legitimate collection business while following all federal and state regulations. When hospital worker Francisco received collection calls about multiple old debts he thought were resolved, Elena's agency used detailed personal information to pressure him into immediate payment arrangements. They knew extensive details about my employment, family members, and financial situation that convinced me their debt claims were legitimate. Francisco explained about the collection pressure. Their access to personal information suggested they had official authority and accurate debt records. However, Francisco discovered that Elena had been operating an illegal debt collection enterprise while purchasing fraudulent debt portfolios containing accounts that had been discharged in bankruptcy, settled, or belonged to other consumers with similar names. Her agency would use illegally obtained personal data to intimidate consumers and their family members into paying debts they didn't owe. Investigation revealed that Elena had been operating a comprehensive debt collection fraud while collecting over $3 million on invalid debts over 6 years, using identity theft and illegal data mining to target over 2,000 consumers with fraudulent collection attempts that caused severe financial and emotional harm to victims who believed they were facing legitimate debt obligations. Our 32nd story brings us to Phoenix, where collection agency supervisor Garrett managed recovery operations for Desert Debt Solutions, overseeing a team of collectors who pursued various types of consumer debts using advanced technology and aggressive contact methods. He had worked in debt collection management for 14 years and was known for achieving high recovery rates through intensive collection campaigns. When retiree Isabella received hundreds of collection calls about old debts she didn't recognize, Garrett's team used multiple phone numbers and contact methods to maintain constant pressure for immediate payment. They called from different numbers multiple times per day and contacted my family members and neighbors about my supposed debts. Isabella recalled about the harassment campaign. The intensity and persistence of their collection efforts convinced me that I must owe legitimate debts. But Isabella learned that Garrett had been coordinating systematic harassment campaigns while directing his collectors to use illegal intimidation tactics and false threats to pressure consumers into paying debts they didn't owe. His operation would violate federal collection laws by contacting consumers excessively and threatening actions they had no authority to take. Investigation uncovered that Garrett had been operating an illegal collection harassment operation while collecting approximately $1.5 million through systematic intimidation over 4 years, causing severe emotional distress and financial harm to over 800 consumers who were targeted with illegal collection harassment designed to force payment through psychological pressure and threats. Our 33rd story concludes in Houston, where collection industry executive Harrison operated Lone Star Recovery Corporation, managing multiple collection agencies and debt purchasing operations throughout Texas while claiming to lead the industry in ethical collection practices and consumer relations. He had worked in the collection industry for 18 years and built a reputation as a reform-minded leader who promoted responsible collection methods. When consumer protection advocate Imogene investigated complaints about collection agencies, Harrison's companies appeared to operate professional collection operations with proper licensing and regulatory compliance. His companies seemed to follow proper procedures and maintain professional appearances that suggested legitimate collection operations. Imogene explained about her investigation. His reputation as an industry leader gave credibility to his collection practices. However, Imogene discovered that Harrison had been operating a massive collection fraud enterprise while coordinating illegal activities across multiple agencies and debt purchasing operations, using sophisticated technology and fraudulent documentation to collect millions of dollars on invalid debts. His operation involved purchasing fraudulent debt portfolios, creating false documentation, using illegal harassment techniques, and coordinating with corrupt attorneys to file fraudulent lawsuits against consumers throughout the state. Investigation revealed that Harrison had been operating the largest collection fraud scheme in state history while collecting over $12 million on invalid debts over 8 years, causing financial harm to over 15,000 consumers through coordinated illegal collection activities that involved systematic violations of federal and state consumer protection laws across multiple collection agencies and legal operations. Thank you for joining me tonight on Drowsy Tales Daily, and may these stories guide you into peaceful sleep with renewed awareness of the importance of consumer protection and defending against collection agencies that would exploit vulnerable debtors during their most financially challenging moments. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you tomorrow night for another collection of fascinating Reddit stories designed to help you drift off to sleep.